Couple of logistical things. My name is Greg Cascella. I'm the communications person here at the district. And at the bottom of your screen, you will not be able to talk or interact with us visually, but there is a button. Well, it's probably in different places in the interface, but on the bottom on a computer and somewhere, if you're on a mobile device, there's a Q&A where you can type in questions. And what we will do is we will, if it's a simple question for me to answer in the chat just by writing it in, I will go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we will hold them until the end of the time to see if it gets answered during the presentation. And then Brandy and Joe can have a time to answer those questions as we get to the end. There should be a new feature we're trying for the first time where if you see a question and you think, oh, that's a good one I want to hear at, you can upvote the question, so it'll kind of sort for us which ones of the questions are most important to the folks here so we can make sure and address those as we come in. So thank you for your time and thank you for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Joe Morlock, our superintendent.
Thanks, Greg, and welcome everyone. I hope this will be informative tonight. We're going to do this in two parts. So I'm going to start off with the informational part of all the pieces of the bond, the things we can do, talk about the scope of the projects, and then I'm going to pass it over to Brandy Penner, who's the chair of our school board, to talk about the importance of voting for the bond. So I'm going to go ahead and launch right in. All right. So a quick overview of the capital bond. It is $141 million that we put on the ballot for November 2020, coming up here in about 14 and a quarter days. In the grand overview, it replaces the aging Dundee Elementary, expands and upgrades Edwards Elementary, and upgrades career and technical education at the high school to cutting edge facilities. It improves the safety, security, and the pandemic health at every building. And it also cares for the long-term public investment in the buildings that have been made over decades and will continue that on to the future so we can continue to maintain and improve the buildings we have. What's not paid for in a capital construction bond, and I think this is really important because often people confuse which kind of funds come from where. And so I wanted to just be really clear about what the bond does not pay for. So a capital construction bond does not pay for teacher or instructional staff salaries and books and curriculum. We did not put those in our bond. And nor does it pay for future operational costs for undefined projects. So in the voters pamphlet, we are required to place the list of the items that we're planning on doing and finishing. And those are the ones that we actually have to work on. It's not something that we can collect the money and then just sit on it and use it for later on when we decide to. Okay, so all of these funds, after we sell the bonds, we're required to use a significant portion, and it's 80% within the 3 years after we've sold bonds. And so voter approval means that you approve the district to borrow up to $141 million. Often districts will not borrow the entire amount because to get all of those projects 80% done in the 3-year time period takes quite a bit of effort. So just wanted to be clear that that the bond does not pay for these. It does pay for capital construction and the people who are involved in building those things. So the long-range facility plan was a process the district went through in January through June of 2018. It's a large amount of folks that come from across the district, community involvement, folks who work in the city, staff members, and they're brought together by a group that reviews all of the buildings we have, the properties we have, the conditions they're in, the adequacy for education, and they come up with a plan that they did deliver to the board in January 2019. So it's a plan about here's what you have, and here's what you need going forward, and here's what we think is the best option for the school to be following. So those plans are actually made up of 3 things: facility conditions, educational program, and then enrollment and capacity. And so during the process of building a long-range facility plan, they try to look at all 3 of those, and then they create some scores. This document is still available on our website, so you can still see the long-range facility plan, pages and pages of things that show you kind of the state of our buildings and what the long-term need is. Now you'll notice from this slide that we're really looking out many, many, many years, because as we consider building buildings, we have to remember, so here in Newberg, we have 10 schools. So if we were to take 10 schools and build a new one, replace one every 10 years, it would still take us 100 years to replace every building. As an example, the district office building, which was the former long time ago, Newberg High School, was built in 1911. And so it's been around a long time. We have lots of buildings from the 50s and 60s, and each one of these at some point will need some replacement. And so a long-range facility plan does look at those kind of pieces to put them together. What we have noticed in more recent time is that we actually are going to be generally okay with enrollment capacity. So we did focus on facility condition and educational program more. As with all buildings, they do age, just like your home, and you do require some required maintenance. There are times when projects are much larger. It's amazing to see just water intrusion over time. Often there was a style of building where they were built with flat roofs, which those of you who live in Oregon here understand that sometimes water tends to pool and becomes a little bit of a challenge. So we do have some water intrusion, land settles, equipment gets older, and some schools need to be replaced or significantly remodeled. Just as a broad number, we have 885,128 gross square feet of Newberg Public School buildings. So if you can imagine how many rooftops that is and the scope of that kind of a project, it takes significant money, and it also takes some planning over time to continue to refresh those buildings. So it's a lot of buildings to take care of with a pretty small and mighty crew. So in order to put a bond onto the ballot, districts will often engage in what's called a bond development committee, which we did. We hired an architecture group called BRIC, and they brought together a group, again, of community members, folks across the district, staff members, and built over a period from September 29 to February 2020, what they believed would be a good core bond package. They do analyze the long-range facility plan because a lot of that work goes into that, and many of those things carried forward. So the things that were put together by long-range facility plan, many of those became some of the core parts of the new bond package. So you look through that plan, go through some additions, people come with the things that they're passionate about, and you start with a really large number because everybody has an idea of what they would like to have as part of the bond. And then you have to pare it down to a number that makes more sense. And that's always a big challenge because people want those things that they're passionate about. I believe that committee did a really good job of being conservative and getting down to a number that they felt were just the most core things that had to be done. They did deliver that plan to the school board in February of 2020. So quick executive summary again, remember we're replacing Dundee, expanding, upgrading Edwards, and improving significantly the career and technical ed at Newberg High School, safety, security, pandemic health at every building, and long-term care of the public investment. Just for the numbers, it does increase taxes by 71 cents per thousand of assessed value. And I want to pause here and talk about the difference between assessed value and real market value. So assessed value is not what you could sell your house for. It's what the state says or the county says your house has as its value. So when you look on your tax statement, you'll see two different numbers. All of these numbers are based upon your assessed value, and those how taxes are assessed, not on your real market value. So it increases by 71 cents. The total tax rate would be about $1.52. That is substantially lower than has been in the last 15 years in the Newberg Public Schools. We ranged anywhere from $2.70 up to $4.08. So this would bring the total amount to $1.52. Just to get an idea of how to calculate that, if you look at an average Newberg home, their average assessed value within the district is $250,000. The tax increase would be $15 a month. If your home is assessed at $400,000, your total tax increase would be $23 a month. So you can kind of get an idea of the scope of those. If you wanted to play along at home, you just multiply 71 cents times that number that's on your tax statement for assessed value, and that'll tell you the yearly cost. The passage of this bond also would qualify us for a grant for the state Awesome grant. I wish it were Awesome with an AWE, but this is Awesome with OSCIM. And it is essentially a matching fund grant that we now qualify for in this one election. If we successfully pass this bond, the state grants us an additional $5 million. If we don't, then we go back to the bottom of the pile of 197 districts in the state, and we would have to work our way back up. But the passage of this bond does allow us, and we have already applied for. So if we are successful if the bond is approved by voters, then the grant for just over $5 million will be coming our way as well. To kind of have a graphical view of what the GO bonds look like over time, this is what the Newberg bonds have looked like in previous times from 2002 forward. And you can see how they range. They were anywhere from the 408 to the 270. As bonds get paid off, and you can see that happening in 2019, 2020, 2021, that's where the amounts, as the bonds are paid off, then the tax assessment, of course, goes down. So what we have proposed is to go to $1.52, which would be that purple. It won't exactly be all the way across that same way, but it will follow fairly closely to that number. So that's kind of what we would be projecting. And that would be, you can see the increase from 2021 up to 2022. So it's been a very short time that residents have been paying a smaller amount, but by and large, you're across there. Where we are right now, so if you can kind of see on the far right side of this, we are the little blue bar. That's where our current tax rate is. If the bond were to pass, it would move us up. These are school districts across our area. So starting on the far left, you've got Gladstone at almost 4.5. Sherwood School District is just about $4. Mount Angel and St. Paul in that $3 range, as long as Westland, Wilsonville, Sheridan, Dayton. And McMinnville is at $2.50. So we are, even after the passage of this bond, somewhere between the North Marion and Amity School District. So still keeping us in that lower third. And this was part of the work of the Bond Development Committee. They thought it was really important to stay at a number they felt residents would be able to afford. One of the questions we often get is, how do we know that the dollars we approve will get spent on the projects that were listed? I believe it's exceptionally important for people to know where their dollars go. We're asking people for their money to put into schools, to put into projects, and they should know where those go. And so we, as required by law, we do have a bond oversight committee that does meet regularly. It is appointed by the school board. They come to regular meetings. We show progress of the projects. We show the books. We talk about all of the things that are happening throughout there, projects to get behind, projects that are ahead of schedule, what's happening next. And it's a really great way for folks to be able to stay involved. And so if this is something that's of interest to you, if this bond is approved, I would suggest please contacting us, and we will get you connected with being part of this bond oversight committee. It's really important that people know where their dollars go. And I think this is actually a great part of the process because it helps us show off the progress and continue to take feedback from people. So the Bond Development Committee did come up with a core bond package, and we've talked about a few of them already. Safety and security was a big thing for them as well. They did look at covered play areas or covered PE areas. One of the questions I've been asked is, why did you put in a covered play area at middle schools? I didn't know they had recess. And while that's true, it's far less expensive than buying or building a brand new gym. Those are some of the options on the table in middle school PE, very full. Again, the beautiful weather we have in Oregon sometime in January, February, as long as it's covered, we can do a lot more. And so this was a place where they felt that they could compromise a bit and be able to have some covered area for both the middle schools. For CTE and STEAM, I've already spoken about the high school one, but we're also talking about starting some of that work at middle school and elementary. Maintenance improvements, the big question that gets asked all the time, will people be working on the HVAC at the high school? Yes. HVAC actually in many buildings is troublesome, and that's one of our primary improvements. I also talked about square footage, and you can just think about how many roofs that is to replace and improve so we can stop the leaks across some of our buildings. Catalyst also would be expanded. When it was originally built and envisioned, it was a much smaller program. It has expanded. They've done an outstanding job of being a school and serving the needs for a part of our population at middle and high school. They're also housing our COA program. So there are some of you out there who are in the Chehalem Online Academy. So it's also being run out through Catalyst. So that would provide a space that for physical activity classroom space as well, so they'd be able to expand just a little bit on that site. We have dollars in there for resiliency and disaster preparedness. There are lots of things that are happening here with the city of Newberg. They've been doing some work. We would also like to tie into those and make some specific improvements to allow us to be ready for any other kind of major disaster that we might have to take care of. Flexible learning spaces, which I'll show you just in a second. Science labs at the high school. Also, they're in bad need of repair, and we're using them all the time, filled with kids. And so we'll be making some significant improvements in those. For our ADA accessibility, as we do major remodels, we do have to make some improvements. Right now, we have 3 buildings with powered front doors for providing access, and that is one of the items that we'll be looking at to improve access for all of our community to make sure they can get in easily and safely. We have some technology thrown in there for, of course, all of the things that were required that are behind the scenes that run our systems. Those continually need to be upgraded. And then finally, renovating some of the rooms at the health clinic space that we've got at the high school, which we've been doing quite a bit of work out of recently with the Wellness Collective and our partnerships with Providence and Yamhill County. We also have a contingency built in. So all of the projects above in the list above do have contingency funds built in because you don't know what you don't know. So you have things that come up sometimes that you may not know was a thing. And so that can be anything from a major settling of the ground where now you have to put in pylons deep into the earth to be able to hold them up. It could be that you're having a different kind of a soil problem from contamination. All these things that you don't know. So we have a contingency built in. So the projects that we've listed, the projects that we have put into the voters pamphlet are the ones that we can deliver on. And we think that that's really valuable for us. So we are at a fairly standard 5%. It feels a little conservative because we want to make sure that we can deliver each project that we have promised the voters. There are additionally bond costs, which about 4%. Some of that is about selling bonds. You also have architects and other engineers and things that take care of those things, as well as the folks who are managing the bond for us. And so all those kind of costs together, that comes up with a $141 million figure. We'll talk a little bit about safety and security. When buildings were built, anywhere from 1911 all the way forward, probably even into the 80s, we did not think about school safety in the same way that we think about it now. So one of the security things that we have been discussing is how do we reformulate the front of our buildings to reduce the amount of access we have to create additional security for the building. And so looking at access control, secure vestibules, and a reworking of office spaces to provide better visibility to those people who are visiting our buildings and a better sense of security overall. So that's one of those kinds of examples for safety and security. And we'd be looking at those at each building. So I do have Antonio Crater up here, but we'll be looking at each building to create some better security at all of them. Another question I get is, what is a flexible learning space? And here you can see a picture of them taking over the gym to make a flexible learning space because they don't have another space to do these kinds of things. And so when we built buildings way back in the day, we built them only for efficiency and not to think about how other things might happen. So we built schools that are called double stacked hallways, which means you have one hallway with doors across from each other and you put as many classrooms into a wing as you can. But that also doesn't allow us to do, as you can see this, you can't imagine that a size of a classroom would be this large to be able to do something interesting like this. And so the Bond Development Committee felt that it was important to have a space that's a shared space for students and teachers to be able to come together, work on some projects, get a little dirty and do all the things, and then be able to put it up and have another group come in instead of having to take over the gym space, because then you've displaced your PE classes. So thinking ahead about what those flexible learning spaces are and places that allow students to try new things with their teachers. Additionally, the CTE program at Newberg High School has been very strong. We're very proud of it. And part of this is about being able to upgrade the facility, upgrading some equipment, and then working towards some additional areas of career and technical ed. Health occupations has long been on the list for additional programs for Newberg High School, along with many others. We know we have industry partners right here in Newberg that are very willing to jump in to help us start some of these programs. And so we have some programs we want to continue and other ones we want to improve. I think it's been really great to see that pendulum swing back a bit from where we got way out into academics for every kid, and now we're looking more at how many other opportunities do we have for students to do some hands-on learning, find something they're passionate in, and be able to do it right here in Newberg. And so this one is a major upgrade to that facility, and will continue the excellence that Newberg High School has had for many, many years. So we're looking forward to that opportunity. Another question I've heard is about why choosing Dundee Elementary. It's always hard to choose one school over another. I will say that we started again with the long-range facility plan and looked at the choices that were made in there, and there are a few things that go into choosing which building you might replace. The long-range facility plan had marked this one with a very low FCI, which is a facility condition index, meaning what's the state of the facility? How well is it holding up? How much dry rot do you have? Is anything settling? What's rusting? And you look at all those kinds of things. Additionally, you match that with what's called an educational adequacy score. So how fit is this building to provide the kind of education that we're doing now, rather than the education that was maybe done in 1952 when the original building was put together. We had additions and remodels 1970, 89, and 94. But really looking at those two things together and comparing it to other buildings, there are a couple other ones who are in great need, but the committee felt strongly that Dundee Elementary needed to be replaced first. It's also, there is long-term growth planned for in Dundee as part of the urban growth boundary and their master plan. So they've been working on a master plan in Dundee for quite a long time. There is land available that they are considering, or that they've actually included in the urban growth boundary to be able to develop. And so those things are coming along the way. So the other question that comes up often is, where is it going to be located? Looking on the map here, you can kind of see that the school's in the lower left, or sorry, lower right corner between Pacific Highway and Northwest 5th or Southwest 5th. The school, if we were to build a new school, could fit in that location. We would be using temporary buildings behind it to put kids into as we demolish certain parts of the building, and so you can build actually on site. We are also looking at some other possible locations within the urban growth boundary. So we are looking at some of the opportunities that may be there. The park area is not expected to be impacted by the new building. So the baseball fields and the other, you can see this one, the parking and tennis courts. So we're not expecting that we would be impacting that space at all. During construction, I'm sure there'll be construction vehicles, but beyond that, we would not, we don't foresee having to use parts of the park that we have leased to CPRD. And the current location, and the reason we're looking at some other opportunities, is that the location on 99E is not ideal. There is a lot of traffic there. It is functional, and we can stay there if we decide that's the best place for it. So there's still a lot of conversation happening with this, but it can be here or it could be located somewhere else. But those decisions already have yet to be made. This is a conceptual rendering. We asked some architects to just give us a view of what it might look like. There are no more details than this. So we wanted to talk about, how do you get a building that kind of fits in with the look and feel of the community it serves, as well as lots of natural light. And you'll notice they have some slanted roofs. So we're hoping that the rain can run off rather than just pool up in those little areas on the flat roof. So starting to look at those kinds of efficiencies and things like that. So this is just a conceptual rendition, so you can kind of get an idea of what a new elementary school may look like. Another big part of the bond is Edwards Elementary. And again, through the prioritization process of the bond development committee, they looked back at the long-range facility plan. Edwards also had a low FCI and educational adequacy scores. Some of the building, of course, was built in the late 80s, early 90s, but the cafeteria itself is one of the major buildings. It was built in 1948. That building is where it houses the cafeteria. It doesn't have a big enough kitchen for the number of students it serves. There's also growth expected in the south area of 99E. Edwards is our only school south of 99E. So it's really important to remember, I'm sorry, 99W. It's all those houses that are coming in that be on the south side of that. It's really important just to they'll grow that direction. And so as we look forward to building some of those things, they do need some additional space. As the program has grown, we do have some modular classrooms there. And so those would also be incorporated. So we needed some additional classroom space so they can come out and be in a main part of a building. And so incorporating the building that we have with an additional, you can kind of see on the far left, again, conceptual rendition from an artist, but then you could do a cafeteria commons with additional classroom space that could match the way it looks like, not impacting the new playground stuff that we've been working on, the covered play area and things like that, but that we have some space to be able to do an improvement on Edwards. The other question I get is, will all schools see improvements and upgrades? Yes, they all will. They may not be as significant as Edwards or a replacement like Dundee, but every school will have work done on maintenance, on safety and security, on some, if they have one covered play area, they would get an additional covered play area. So lots of things will be happening at every one of the schools across the district. I think that's really important to remember, that there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of improvements to be made, and those will happen across the space. So as you recall from a few slides ago, our bond development committee brought to the board in February of 2020 their core bond package, and then just a month later, we were going into a pandemic and we were closing down schools. And so things changed quite a bit. We brought our bond development committee back. We did do some polling to find out kind of where people were. We brought all those things forward to the long-range facility plan, or sorry, to the bond development committee. We gave them different options to look at different size packages. They came back with a unanimous recommendation for the same core package. They felt that they had trimmed it enough, and that 141 million coming in at this lower amount than we have even planned it coming in at. So originally it was going to come in at 99 cents. Bond rates have dropped to 2.4%, which is down from their 4.4 normal area. So for us, the dollar amount dropped to 71 cents. And they felt like that was still the right amount for the kinds of projects that they wanted to bring forward to the school board. The board did adopt and decide to place on the November ballot in August of 2020 the bond that we have before us. And then from the district side of things, we do have an official website that's kind of a starting point where it'll talk a little bit about some of the projects at each one of your schools. If the bond is approved by voters, this is where we will continue to update all of the things that are happening in all the schools. So that is at newbergschoolbond.org, and so you can get more information there. And then I am going to hand this over to Chair Penner.
I'll start by unmuting myself. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Okay. I'm always a little amazed when this works. There we go. Well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. I know I see a couple of familiar names in our attendees, but there's also some new names. So I'm excited that everyone's here tonight. So a big part of the questions I kind of get is why a bond in 2020? So before we start that, I'm going to go ahead and show you this little video, it's a short little clip, and it really talks about what a bond is. So I want to make sure that we all leave this presentation fully knowing what's going on here. Oops, no, that's not going to work. Let's see.
School Bond 101. A crash course in school finance. I knew so. Buildings are a big part of running a school district. Growing districts need new schools and classrooms, and older schools need to be renovated. Classroom tools need upgrading, like new computers.
You've got mail.
Whiteboards. And science equipment. And eventually that has to be replaced. That costs money. Lots of money. So school districts turn to bonds. Bonds work a lot like loans. They have a starting principal and an interest rate. All sorts of investors buy school bonds, such as banks and hedge funds, private investors, maybe even you, if you have something like a 401k. Every year, districts pay back some of the principal plus interest. After 20 or 25 years of these payments, the district pays off the bond. That money comes from taxpayers like you.
All right, there we go. So that's the only movie time for the presentation, sorry. But so most people don't know that in the state of Oregon, public buildings are locally funded. That means if you need to build a police station, if you need to build a library, if you need to build a school building, that money has to be generated locally. So why a bond in 2020? Because a thriving community has excellent schools. We know that employers, small employers up to large employers, are looking to relocate to Newberg. And without excellent schools, our community will be at a very serious economic disadvantage. My husband and I are one example. When we were looking to relocate, we were looking within about a 35-minute commute of Hillsborough. And there were other towns that we purposely did not choose because of their school systems. And if we are looking to continually attract families to Newberg, we must have a thriving school system with buildings that meet the needs of our kids and staff. Why a bond in 2020? Because COVID has created some serious needs for our students and our staff. And when we return to school, we know that their needs will continue. This bond package includes remodeling of administrative areas of each school to incorporate the health spaces and isolation rooms if needed. The picture that you saw of Crater was a really great example of that. It also includes an expansion of the health facilities at the high school and addresses ongoing maintenance needs of HVAC systems, ventilation, and air filtration. Our buildings must reflect the reality of COVID with more space in classrooms so that kids can socially distance, more outdoor learning opportunities like the covered PE spaces, and better ventilation and air filtration systems. And without bond funds, we will be unable to address these issues. Why a bond in 2020? Like Dr. Morlock said, buildings age. If we're able to replace one school building every 10 years, it will still take us 100 years to replace the buildings that we currently have, not including the district office, which I believe was built in 1911, or the facility maintenance plan. Why a bond in 2020? Because buildings need maintenance. As homeowners and renters, we all understand that from paint to roofing, buildings need ongoing maintenance. Our schools not only serve the roughly 4,700 kids and 500 staff, but also our community. These buildings are used year-round as social and community spaces, and they need to meet our community's needs in case of emergencies. And we saw that just recently with the firefighters. When meals needed to be prepped for the firefighters, they turned to the school kitchens, and we were able to offer that support. We know that in our community, buildings do not stop working when the bell rings and the buses pull out. Why a bond in 2020? Because education is evolving and buildings must meet current needs. We're asking our teachers and students to think creatively and critically and to collaborate. Their learning spaces have to reflect what we're asking of them. This bond includes funds to expand flexible learning spaces, like Dr. Morlock pointed out. And can I just say, just seeing a picture of children together in a collaborative learning space just made my heart warm. We will get back to that. We will get back to that. This bond also addresses our technology costs. We know that with thousands of Chromebooks in the hands of kids right now, our technology costs will be going up. And also this bond includes the infrastructure in order to upgrade those technologies. It also includes an expansion of the Springbrook building that houses Catalyst and a major renovation of the CTE facilities at the high schools. And like Dr. Morlock pointed out, if we want programs like Tiger Manufacturing to grow, and if we want to continue to build our community partnerships with programs like the Wellness Collective, if we want to train our kids for life outside of school, we have to give them opportunities to learn in safe buildings that meet their needs. So some building specific projects, you can see we've got Dundee and the cost, the modernization of Edwards, the modernization of the CTE and STEAM buildings at the high school, that expansion at Catalyst, those science lab upgrades, and also the modernization and expansion of the health clinic. And I like this slide, even though Dr. Morlock has it in his, but his is very small. And these are just reading glasses at this point, but I have never worn them so much except for in a time of COVID. So I enjoyed this in case you wanted a larger look at the numbers associated with those projects. And then we have our district-wide projects. So these are the things that will impact every building, those technology upgrades, the replacement and the addition of the covered outdoor spaces, those ADA improvements. I was just at Joanne Austin, and even though that's our newest building, they have 2 different access doors that don't have the push button, and they have a student with a disability that needs to be able to do that. So that student's not able to access the space the same way that other students are, and it's unacceptable. Also across the district, we've got our safety and security updates, our CTE and STEAM improvements, deferred maintenance, that disaster resiliency preparedness, and those flexible learning spaces. The cost to you, the taxpayer, again, I like to make sure that everybody understands. So this is a 71-cent increase per 1,000 of assessed value for the total tax rate of $1.52 per thousand, which is considerably lower than where we've historically been in the last 15 years, which has been between $2.70 and $4.08. Oops. Oh, there we go. So again, you can see Newberg down here in the bottom. Out of the 34 districts around us, Newberg is the 29th lowest in terms of school bond tax rates. And I mean, you could name a district around us: McMinnville, Sherwood, Yumho, Carleton, St. Paul, Gaston, Dayton, all have higher tax rates. So even with our increase up to $1.52, we're still going to be in the bottom third of neighboring districts. And I think that was an incredibly conscious choice by the Bond Development Committee to really ensure that what we were asking was reasonable and a responsible ask from our community. So some important dates, some of these have already passed us up. Everybody should be getting or have gotten their ballots. I know a lot of people are already sending them in, which is excellent. The 28th will be the absolute last day to send them via the mail. After that, they do need to be dropped off in the White County drop boxes. There's one at Jakewith Park, one over the PCC campus, and one by the police station. So how can you help? Right now, our big push is to get word out, to get information out. We really have not faced a lot of opposition from the community. And I've been to a lot of community groups by this point. You might be able to tell from my voice. And I have to say, we really are not facing opposition, but the difficult task is making sure that everybody is aware of it and everybody's educated on it. And that's hard because we're not having our big community gatherings, right? We're not having our parent pickups and drop-offs and things like that. So social media is really important. So the liking the Vote Yes for NPS Facebook page is a big help. And then sharing it is big. You can still donate. We're still doing some funds for continued outreach. We've got we recently received a donation, so we'll be having a paper ad, and we might have seen door hangers hanging up everywhere this weekend. That's where those funds are going to, just to get the word out. You could also get a yard sign. We still have some left. And we may still have even some large signs for businesses too, if you know of anybody. And of course, the number one thing you can do is vote. Please vote. If you have any questions for me specifically or the PAC, you can check out voteyesfornps.org, or feel free to email me at any time. So Joe, are you ready for questions? Okay.
Yes, I am, and I'm even unmuted, believe it or not.
Okay. Here we go.
I've been answering them away, so I don't know, Joe, if you want to just look through them and add any additional stuff verbally to those, but they've been kind of factual ones that I've been able to answer as we've been going on, but you can feel free to chime in with more detail.
Sure.
Love it. Thank you, Greg.
So one of the questions coming in tonight about putting money into 2012, when Catalyst that was built in 2012. That is true. Catalyst was built at that time. They did not envision that the program would be as successful as it has become. And so I think that we're actually using that program in quite a bit of different ways. We've added far more kids than I think that they expected to have in that program, and it's been wildly successful. It actually was envisioned to be able to be expandable as a building. So the building was built in such a way that the land behind it and the way the classrooms are set would allow for an expansion. That's something that also has been asked about Dundee. Why are you only building it at 350 student capacity? And part of that comes down to the amount of money that we have available for other projects, as well as they can and they do now design schools in such a way that you can add on. So it doesn't look like something that's just a big old lump added to the other building you used to have. So they do design buildings in such a way that makes it easy for you to add capacity if that were something to become necessary down the road. So Springbrook was actually designed with that in mind, that they may have to expand it at some point. I'm not sure that they thought we would expand it quite so quickly, but it does happen. And then if you look at buildings like Joanne Austin and Antonia Crater, again, built relatively recently, but the idea of security vestibules and things are relatively, they're quite a bit newer. And so some of that rearrangement is about creating better visibility for watching folks as they come in and providing better security for the building. There are some roofing things, and there are some flashing parts around windows and all kinds of things that create some concern, and that does happen in buildings. And unfortunately, it's happened in a few of ours, and some of that could be a design flaw, and some of that are just as building age. For those of you who have your own roof, you know that water always finds a way, and then where you're dripping is maybe not where it's actually coming in. And so there's just a lot of that work to be done across the district. And again, some of that is about the change from a flat roof to some slanting roofs and some other things. But buildings do age, and they do need maintenance, and usually much larger than a maintenance crew can take care of. And that's why I put that number in there, just about the gross number of square feet of just the buildings, not the land, because we also have folks who maintain our fields and bushes and all the rest of the stuff around the grounds. And so it's quite a bit of work to maintain those as well.
Joe, I wanted to say one more thing too quickly about Catalyst. I was just there last week doing my, I'm sorry about, I don't know how to turn off that sound. I was just there last week with Principal Graham, and the building is beautiful. You can tell it's clearly a newer building. It's lovely. But in speaking with him about it, there's no physical movement space. They don't have any kind of gym space. And it's also a problem because they're actually not able to accommodate all the kids who would like to be in that program. And that's of today, that's not, so it's going to be higher and higher every year. And now's the time to really start planning for that.
Okay, I'm not seeing. Okay, and Greg, you seem to have answered the other questions that came up within the chat. So just to reiterate on construction bonds versus levies, there are operating levies where people use those to pay employees to run the district. This is specific to a capital construction bond about building projects and remodeling schools, replacing schools for that long-term thing. So I think it's important for us to remember, we're really focusing on three main areas: health, safety, and security, which I think is exceptionally important for us. So, your HVAC systems that can take care of better air and better circulation, updating and upgrading your schools, because if you look over the course of history, the kinds of things that we're doing now are things that people will reap benefits for far into the future and far after we are gone and away. And then finally, modernizing classrooms. Education does change. Things are envisioned in one way, and sometimes you make adjustments along the way. Bonding, public bonding, is the way that all buildings are built, and it really does keep the investment that the community has already put into their buildings going for the long haul. I think it's an important thing to remember, that you have to keep track of the kinds of projects that you need to do to keep your building in great shape, all of your buildings in great shape. Okay, and then why are schools in such a desperate situation about maintenance? So it looks like all kinds of terrible things. We do have a maintenance crew. We do keep track of those. But historically and forever, the kinds of dollars that come into schools are by and large paying for the staff that teach the children and to operate all the things around the education. Yes, we do have a maintenance crew, but with nearly almost $900,000 in facility, just gross square feet, there's just too many other kinds of projects like that that take huge amounts of money that we would be taking away from educating children. And so choices have been made along the way to put money into certain areas and not into others, and often for the benefit as many children as possible. So this, among every other kind of a public bonding thing that school districts do across this state, this is a fairly perfect example of the kinds of things that we would put into a bond to then ask voters to approve.
Joe, I wanted to speak really briefly. This is, I think the high school HVAC system is a really good example of this. So the high school HVAC system is basically aged beyond itself. So the parts are no longer available. They're no longer manufactured. So parts have to be sourced from other school districts or other places, and they're basically swapped out. So that is certainly not a deferred maintenance issue. That is simply the reality of having a building. Things age, and then you're looking at large repairs. So, you know, if your roof is a small leak, you fix it. If it's a chronic problem like Crater Falls, I got to experience that this week when you walk into Crater Elementary, and there's just 2 standing garbage cans, and there was actually water in it. I mean, it's raining, and so those are those large kind of things that we can't budget for. That's partially what a bond addresses.
Another question here about how many bonds should we expect in the next 5 to 10 years. At this point, we're only planning on this one. Bonds come along every so often, as you can see from before. And Greg, you're going to have to correct me when the last bond was.
2012.
2011.
2011. Okay, so about every decade. As we had one before that, it was actually quite a bit of a space in between. The 2012 or 11 bond was a smaller bond that did some of these kind of projects. And so at this point, we're just focusing on this one, keeping the cost low. So if in the future they were going to go for a bond, the district, if they chose to do that, then they would have some space far below where they had been in the past. And so I think that's, again, the amount of work necessary to actually put together the projects of $141 million bond and then execute those projects have to be done in a pretty timely manner. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into that over that time period. So there's quite a bit of work after the bond is passed in order to get those jobs to completion across all the buildings. And so there's quite a bit of work done before we'd be thinking about doing something else in the future. Okay. Another question, we know all the projects are recurring events. How come this is not planned? Having money set aside. So, you know, if you look at the dollar amount, we do actually set aside money. We have money available that we've been planning on spending for the remodeling, the resurfacing of the turf field at the high school as an example. And that we've been holding money in what's called the construction excise tax. So when homes are built or buildings are built, there's a certain amount of money that comes to the district. That money is being saved over time to redo that project. But 141 million is essentially twice as much money as we would get in 2 years' time if we didn't pay any employee and the state gave us all the money we would normally get to have nobody here, which is different than paying teachers who are working at home and students who are at home. I think that's one of the misnomers. And so the kind of scope that we're talking about on these projects, that's why districts propose to go out for school bonds, because saving that kind of money, even for relatively significant projects, often what districts will do will create what's called an Evergreen bond program, where they'll have a bond and then they'll just try to renew that bond, every so many years, so every 10 years or every 20 years, and they'll have multiple bonds and they keep everybody's tax level the same, and then that way people can just count on that and have to go up and down. And that's actually an important part of what did not happen in the past. And so we're trying to get us to a place where we can begin to be more level and then get some projects done underway. Okay, Greg, I think that might be it for the Q&A. And Brandy, I don't know if you have any final words you'd like to say.
No, I just think, we've had some really great questions here tonight, and in every group that we've met with, we've had just really active and engaged questions. And it's clear that our community is really critically looking at this. And it's good to know that, because I was part of the bond development committee and the long range Facilities Planning Committee, and now the PAC. So it feels like for about 2 years, we've been putting a lot of work into this, and there's a lot of people who have been doing that. So it's good to know our community is doing the same. And I really appreciate all of you showing up tonight. And again, feel free to reach out if you have more questions or would like any more information.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody out for coming out tonight too. This will be available on YouTube. I'm sure that many of you will enjoy watching it again, but you're certainly welcome to put it out there. It'll be available via our YouTube channel as well, so you can check it out later. And any questions, of course, reach out to either Brandy or myself or Greg, and we can try to answer your questions best we can. Our district official website is newbergschoolbond.org. You can get more information there, and look forward to seeing you all in the future soon. So thank you for coming out tonight.
Great. Thank you. Have a good night.